Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories of everyday people and their families. I endeavour to continue publishing episodes ad-free. In order to do so, I would love your support by reviewing my podcast or consider becoming a subscriber for only the cost of a coffee a month. This gives you early access to episodes and also access to bonus episodes, of which at this stage there's over 30. Episode 186, Alice Maria Ninness. Part 1. Many thanks to Paula Wright for assisting me in this episode. Paula shared her story on her Facebook genealogy site, and her family story on Alice made a great basis for an episode. Alice Maria Ninness was born on the 3rd of October 1874 in Patterson, New South Wales, and she was the daughter of William Ninness and Anne Towns. Alice's paternal grandfather, William Ninness Jr., was a convict who was born in Penryn, Cornwall, England. Some of the following facts on William Ninness were adapted from information compiled by Rupert J. Brown in 1989. William Ninness was 22 when he was convicted in the Cornwall Lent Assizes in March 1828. His crime was sacrilege for the theft of some goods from the parish church of St. Gluvius in Penryn. His occupation was a brass founder. His father, also William, was in business as a brazier and tinsmith and subsequently took his son into the business and trained him in these crafts. A notice was published in the West Briton and Cornwall Advertiser on the 19th of October 1827, charging William with stealing 5 pieces of silver plate from St. Gluvius Church, where his own parents had married and where he'd been baptised, and a reward of 10 guineas was offered for his apprehension. The advertisement reads, "Absconded, 10 guineas reward," whereas William Ninness, son of William Ninness, alias Young Cross, of the borough of Penryn in the county of Cornwall, Brazier, stands charged with having broken into the parish church of St. Gluvius at Penryn and sacrilegiously stolen therefrom 5 pieces of silver plate and other articles, and has since absconded. We, the undersigned, do hereby offer a reward of 10 guineas to be paid to any person or persons who shall apprehend the said William Ninness, and shall bring him before one of his Majesty's Justices of the Peace for the said county of Cornwall at Penryn. William Ninness is about 22 years of age, 5 foot 6 inches high, has a heavy slouching walk, a dark complexion marked with smallpox, black eyes with a downcast look, and black hair. He generally wears olive fustian short jacket and trousers and has made 1 voyage to America. Any persons after this notice discovered harbouring or concealing William Ninness will be prosecuted. His prison record indicates that he had no prior convictions to this. So William Ninness, George Risdon and Alexander Bray were jointly charged with entering the church of St. Gluvius with force and arms at about 1 a.m. in the morning of the 4th of October 1827, stealing 1 silver flagon valued £5, 1 silver chalice valued at £2 10 shillings, 1 silver paten £2 10 shillings, 50 ounces of silver worth £12, 5 silver shillings, 5 bottles, 3 pence each, and 4 quarts of wine worth 4 shillings. The 3 men were held at Launceston Jail until the Lenten Assizes, when they were brought before Sir Judge Stephen Gazellee on the 25th of March 1828. In the Royal Cornwall Gazette of the 29th of March 1828, the case was reported in detail. Sir Joseph Littledale, in his address to the grand jury of 27 local magistrates, particularly drew their attention to the case of sacrilege and the recent change to the Act, making it a capital offence where a church has been broken into and entered. When the hearing commenced, Alexander Bray, who'd been given indemnity, gave King's evidence and told all he knew. He related that he and George Risdon, with whom he shared the same bed at a lodging house, had gone to Falmouth with William Ninness after work on the 4th of October 1827. They went to the Royal Oak at Falmouth and drank there until 11 p.m. On their return to Penryn, Bray and Risdon found themselves locked out of their lodging house. They then went into Truro Lane, where Ninness said he knew where there was wine. They then went to the nearby church, opened the window with a knife and entered the vestry. Ninness found the key to the box and they removed the wine, the contents of the poor box and the articles of silver. The 3 men then went into Elm Field where they drank 5 bottles of wine. Before parting, Ninness buried the silver under a hedge surrounding his father's garden. Some days later, Ninness and Risdon took the silver, now cut into pieces, to Redruth Fair, where Risdon attempted to sell it to a jeweller, who immediately took Risdon into custody. Ninness fled to Swansea, where he was apprehended and subsequently returned to Penryn by boat in the charge of Constable George Barnacote. The amateur detection efforts of the gardener, Mr. Piper, resulted in a telling piece of evidence flowing from his notice of footmarks on a cushion beneath the window of the church. He measured the marks and cut a piece of paper to fit the mark of the right foot. Risdon's shoe was examined and it tallied with the measure. The prisoners expressed the opinion that they would not have done it if they had not been drunk. The judge summed the evidence with great minuteness and merciful consideration towards the prisoners, who were both almost immediately found guilty of sacrilege by the jury. George Risdon and William Ninness were both sentenced to death, whilst Alexander Bray was acquitted as a consequence of King's evidence. The passing of sentence occupied his lordship some time in consequence of the excellent advice and strong exhortations he gave to the prisoners to amend their lives. William's father, William Ninness Sr., submitted a petition addressed jointly to Sir Robert Peel, Secretary of State, and also to Sir Joseph Littledale and Sir Stephen Gazeley, judges for the county of Cornwall. The petition drew attention to the long residence and respectability of the Ninness family in Penryn, the service to the borough of William's grandfather as Sergeant of Mace, and the cherished hope that young William, as the only son, would assist his father in running his business in old age and eventually succeed him. William's father stated that his wife had been confined to her bed and her life despaired of. He also stated that William's sister Mary was only 20 years of age and has suffered the visitation of the Almighty through grief since her brother's imprisonment. She'd been buried at St. Gluvius on the 20th of March 1828. He also had 6 younger sisters. More than 60 male citizens of Penryn signed the petition, which sought commutation of William's death sentence to some term of imprisonment. John Mitchell and Richard Lashbrook certified that during 1826, while on board the ship Ariel, laying in Falmouth Harbour, William Ninness saw a seaman fall overboard from His Majesty's ship Astrea, and to the great danger of his life jumped overboard and caused the man to be spared. Further testimony was given by Robert Dyett, who certified that when passing through the borough of Penryn one Saturday night during 1827, he was violently obstructed and dreadfully beaten. Had it not been for William Ninness, who came to my assistance, I will solemnly declare that I believe I should have been murdered. As a result of the petition, a communication was forwarded to the King on the 19th of April 1828, recommending that the sentences of death be reprieved as proper objects of royal mercy and compassion. Accordingly, William Ninness was sentenced to be transported beyond the seas for the term of his natural life. George Risdon was sentenced to be imprisoned and kept at hard labour in the House of Correction for 2 years. The impact of young William's crime and imprisonment extended beyond his mother's protracted illness and his sister Mary's premature death. His grandfather William Ninness died about 17 months later and was also buried in the churchyard at St. Gluvius on the 17th of August 1829. He revealed his feelings in his will when he bequeathed all of his properties, business and monies to be divided equally between his 4 sons, John, Thomas, James and Joseph. To his eldest and other son, that is William's father, he left 1 shilling of lawful British money. William was taken from Launceston and held in the hulks at Devonport, and the jailers report at this time said a most desperate character, former course of life extremely bad. On the convict records it stated he was able to read and write and was a Protestant. He boarded the convict ship Victoria, which sailed from Plymouth on the 1st of September 1828. The surgeon superintendent, Mr. James Dixon, reported that little or no sickings occurred before the vessel arrived at Tenerife, but immediately after departure, pyrexia fever began to show itself. Mr. Dixon remarked the happy effects produced by extracting blood in very large quantities. There were 160 convicts on board, of which 69 were put on the sick list. Ship's records reveal that William Ninness reported suffering pyrexia on the 12th of October and received medicine in his berth without appearing on the sick list. The Victoria arrived in Sydney on the 17th of January 1829. The muster produced 134 convicts, with 17 hospitalised and 9 dying at sea. On his arrival at Sydney, William Ninness was assigned to a large landholder, Edward Gostwick Corey, a Devon man that was born at Exeter. Corey had arrived in New South Wales in 1823 and, together with his brother, Captain John Corey, RN, had received grants of the finest land near the village of Patterson in the Newcastle district, exceeding 5,000 acres. A pastoralist's life at this time had very real problems. Aboriginals burnt barns and haystacks, attacked sheep and speared workmen. 12 Aborigines were shot by Corey's men after attacking sheep in April 1827. Additionally, not all convicts were happy to conform to the rigours and restraints of life as an assignee, which confined their movements to boundaries of their master's property and obliged them to work without remuneration except for the government food and clothing ration. William Ninness did 10 years of service with Edward Corey, and in accordance with government orders he was granted a ticket of leave effective from the 1st of May 1839. This ticket enabled William to employ himself for his own benefit, acquire property on the condition of residing in the district, and present himself and ticket before the magistrates when required, attend worship weekly if performed within a reasonable distance. William set up business as a tinsmith in the nearby village of Patterson as soon as he was released, and 11 months later, on the 27th of April 1840, he married Jane Bloodworth, a young bounty migrant from King Stanley, Gloucestershire, in Oakville, New South Wales, when William was 33 and Jane 19. The marriage produced 11 children. The Governor of New South Wales, Sir George Gipps, recommended William for a pardon, which was approved by Queen Victoria on the 16th of January 1847, 14 years after he was sentenced. His pardon had a provision, though, that he was never to return to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and if he did, his pardon will become void. So things seemed to be looking up for William Ninness and his wife and family. However, after 17 years of marriage, Jane died of milk fever at the early age of 35 on the 10th of January 1857, leaving William with the responsibility for 8 surviving children, with their ages ranging from 4¼ months to 16 years. William subsequently remarried a young currency lass, that is, a lady born in the colony, Charlotte Curtis, and this union produced a further 7 children. William successfully conducted his tinsmith's business at Patterson for more than 40 years, surrounded by his wife and his 15 surviving children, comprising of 8 sons and 7 daughters. All of his children married and generally raised large families of their own. Most of them moved to provincial centres in New South Wales and Queensland. William was a valued and respected member of the community and chose to remain a resident of the area upon his release with his ticket. There was one little blip with William Ninness, and this was on the 6th of February 1862 when he was charged with horse stealing and tried at Maitland, New South Wales. He was jailed for 12 months, but his sentence was remitted and he was released on the 10th of October 1862. And the Maitland Mercury and Hunter River General Advertiser outlined this. William Ninness was charged by Joseph Smith with trespass on his land and driving off cattle. The complainant deposed that he lived at Sherwood and on the 4th of April saw the defendant just before daybreak go up to his flat and drive away 6 head of my cattle. He afterwards impounded 4 of them. I was not 10 yards from the defendant when I saw him drive the cattle off. I cannot be deceived. It is certainly this man I had been watching all night, and it was starlight at the time. The defendant gave no notice to his intention of entering my land. Robert Hancock corroborated the complainant's evidence and added that the cattle were working bullocks. The defendant was convicted and sentenced to pay a fine of 40 shillings and court costs, or 14 days' imprisonment. William Ninness died at nearby Newcastle on the 12th of March 1882 at the age of 77, and he was buried at the St Andrew's Anglican Churchyard at North Waratah. A gathering of his descendants took place on Australia Day in 1988 at Patterson, where the opportunity was taken for them to visit the Corey homestead, Gostwick, and the old convict quarters where William would have resided for 10 years. They also visited the village church, where he married. So William and Jane had Maria's father, William Henry Dillon Ninness III, on the 23rd of June 1842. William married Anne Marie Towns at Patterson, New South Wales, on the 19th of July 1864 when they were 22. Anne Towns was born on the 3rd of October 1842 in Patterson. Her parents, George Towns and Mahala Shepherdson, were English. They'd married in England in 1836 and immigrated to New South Wales in 1841. Anne's father, George, died in 1857, aged only 41 when Anne was only 15. In 1875, there was a flood at Eccleston and Lostock, and it mentions Mr. William Ninness, saying that he lost all of his crops due to the flood, and his fencing was all swept away, and nothing was left of his cultivation. In 1913, William was a grazier at Stewart's Brook in the Upper Hunter. Anne died on the 25th of October 1915 at Islington, and William died 4 years later on the 1st of April 1919, also in Islington, aged 76. Now coming to their daughter Maria. Maria Ninness, at the age of 18, was charged at Singleton with stealing a quantity of goods in May 1892. In July 1893, in the Maitland Mercury and the Hunter River General Advertiser, it says Frederick Turner was summoned by Alice Maria Ninness to answer a charge of leaving his illegitimate child without means of support. Mr. Young, who appeared for the plaintiff, stated that the summons had not been served and the bench ordered it to continue. A year later, on the 23rd of August 1894, in the Maitland Daily Mercury, child desertion. Frederick Turner was charged by Alice Maria Ninness with deserting his illegitimate child at Lostock. Alice Maria Ninness, a spinster, said she'd known the accused since they were at school together. They had been lovers. The defendant had visited at her father's house at Lostock in August 1892. Her parents were away but came back while the defendant was there. Her father had said he did not like it and Turner left. He had tried to become intimate with her but did not succeed. The witness had a few words with her father and she went to stay with a Mrs. Dennis, her sister, at Lostock. She stayed there for about a week. The defendant called to see her there. She went to stay at Mrs. Florey's place, another sister, at Lostock, in the early part of September. The defendant called there 2 to 3 times a week. They became intimate in the second week on the Wednesday and once afterwards on the following Sunday night. No one had been intimate with her since. He said he would marry her on different occasions and she expected him to fulfill his promise. She had told him that she thought that she was enceinte. The defendant wanted her to take some pills, but the witness had told him it might kill her and did not take them. He promised to call round and tell her when he would marry her, but he did not come. She wrote him a letter, but he did not reply. She wrote him another letter, but got no answer. She then went home. She knew a month afterwards that she was enceinte. The child was born at East Maitland on the 10th of June 1893. The defendant was working a farm, which he said was his own. She had received £13 odd from the defendant's father for the support of the child. The child was still alive. The defendant was still farming and working continuously. The child was sickly and she was prepared to receive 10 shillings a week. She knew it was August 1892 because it was after the show. She was alone with the defendant, but a man named Job Lawrence was in the kitchen. She did not know that the defendant and Lawrence came to the house to collect money, which her father owed. Her father did not owe Turner any money. She did not hear any conversation between her father and Turner about money. It was about a week after that the witness went to Dennis's. She did not see Turner there in October. Mr. and Mrs. Dennis said the witness were out in the front of the house when Turner came. They did not hear Dennis ask him inside. Another girl came to Florey's after she went there. She had not seen any young men hanging about Florey's. She had never gone for a walk with men named Garland and Hancock. She had visited a solicitor's office with a woman named Lavender. She came to show her the office and was not a friend of hers. She knew a woman named Jolliffe and had a conversation with her after the birth of her child, but she never said, "If Fred is not the father of my child, he is better to pay for it than anyone else." She'd never been in trouble before. She'd been in Singleton but did not know a young man named Frederick Spinks. No one in Singleton had been intimate with her. She'd stayed one night at Mr. George Lawrence's house. She'd never been playing with some men there. The intimacy took place once in the house and twice outside. At the time she received the money from the defendant, the latter was not present. Paul Lavender had nursed her through her confinement. When she came to Mr. Hill's office, it was on business of her own. Jane Dennis, the sister of the plaintiff, stated that she had not come willingly. She remembered her sister coming to her house in August 1892. She knew the defendant who had visited her sister at the house, and they had been alone together. She had heard him ask her an indecent question. She had listened because the plaintiff was under her care. She could not say whether the defendant was working for his father or not. A farm labourer usually got £1 a week in rations. Her sister had stayed a week or two with her. The river was in flood when the defendant came to the house. She did not hear the defendant ask her husband if he could cross. They went inside afterwards. No one else had visited the house to see her sister. George Florey, farmer of Lostock, deposed that he remembered Miss Ninness visiting his place in September. She stayed 3 or 4 weeks. The defendant visited the house 3 or 4 times and they were often alone. They were keeping company. He did not know then of any impropriety existing between them. He had not seen any young fellows hanging about the place. Turner and his father work a farm. A man generally receives 10 shillings, 12 shillings or 15 shillings a week with rations. The defendant used to stay till 10 o'clock. They were close neighbours. They were alone on each occasion while the defendant was there. For the defence, Elizabeth Everleigh, domestic servant, deposed that she was living at Mrs. Florey's in 1892 when Maria Ninness was staying there. The defendant came there several times while they were there. Arthur Hancock and Garland used to come there also. Garland did not come to see witness. He used to pay attention to Miss Ninness and was often alone with her at 12 o'clock at night after the others had gone to bed. Once they went outside for half an hour. She was not alone with Hancock. Witness had a conversation with the plaintiff and the latter had said she liked Garland. Turner and the plaintiff had never been alone. Cross-examined by Mr. Hill, Garland had been there about 7 times. She knew he stayed till 12 o'clock because she heard the clock strike. She had seen Turner there 2 to 3 times. Garland and Turner turned up together once. Miss Ninness stayed for 3 weeks after the witness went there. The young men did not come after Miss Ninness left. Frederick Turner, the defendant, deposed that he was working with his father at Lowestoft. He had visited the plaintiff in May 1892. He knew because he was going away on a trip. He went for some money that the plaintiff's father owed him. Job Lawrence went with him. The father was not at home and they both remained together till he came. The father said he did not allow anyone at his house when he was away, and the defendant told him he came for the money. He'd called at Dennis's when returning from a trip and asked about the state of the river. He'd seen the plaintiff at Florey's on 3 occasions but went on business. He had been there on previous occasions. He had never been intimate with the plaintiff in his life. He'd seen several young men with her. He was farming for his father and received no wages. He'd never been on terms of friendship with the plaintiff. He'd never kissed her. Florey had asked him over to play cards. He'd never left home to evade service of a summons issued by Mr. Young for this child. He had been told by his own people that the plaintiff was going to make him pay for it. He had got a letter from the plaintiff but could not say when. He had written the letter produced. He intended to tell her when he was to meet her that he would clear out of the country before he would pay for another man's child. He had been told by others that they would pay for it if it was their child. It was in June that he went to Sydney to join the police force. His father had sent him word the matter was settled for 12 months. He came home because he would have to resign at the end of the 12 months. The evidence given by the plaintiff was not correct. He had never had an opportunity to take advantage of her. George Lawrence, farmer of Tea Tree, deposed that the plaintiff was staying at his house about 2 years ago on account of the flood. The plaintiff went to bed on one occasion with the witness's own daughters, and she afterwards came out in her nightgown when there was a number of young men about. She was afterwards on a couch with a young man. The bench made an order of 7 shillings 6 a week for 12 months to be paid to Sergeant Oxley. 8 shillings costs, £2 and 2 shillings professional costs, and £3 witnesses' expenses. On the 12th of September 1895, in the Maitland Daily Mercury, Frederick Turner was called upon to answer a complaint made by Alice Maria Ninness. The defendant, who admitted the paternity of the child, had been contributing to its support for 12 months, and a fresh order was asked for by Mr. Hill, who appeared for the complainant. The defendant said he could not afford to pay 7 shillings 6 per week and owed £30, which he borrowed to pay for the previous order. The bench made an order for the defendant to pay 7 shillings 6 per week for 12 months, £1 1 shilling professional costs, and 5 shillings and 10 court costs, and to find security for the payment of the money. The baby referred to was Pearlie Ann Victoria Ninness. She had her birth registered at East Maitland in New South Wales in 1893, and family trees have her birth date as the 10th of June 1893. However, interestingly, family trees have another child, another girl, that was born on the same birth date, Matilda Amy Ninness. However, there is no formal birth record for a Matilda Amy Ninness in the New South Wales records. The only indicator of her birth date is actually what is on her gravestone. So I'll come to her in a minute. So Pearlie Ann Victoria Ninness is definitely registered in New South Wales in 1893. However, family trees also have Pearlie registered under Gertrude Pearl Ninness in 1898 birth register in Scone, New South Wales, and in this record it states that she is the daughter of Albert Ninness, who's in fact Alice's brother. So is it possible that Pearlie was actually handed over to Albert and his wife for them to unofficially adopt and bring up, and for all intents and purposes put a birth record in to legally state that this is our daughter? It does strengthen this theory when looking at the 1947 census. Pearlie is living with Emily Ninness, who is Albert Ninness's wife, so her auntie, at 42A Church Street, Newcastle. So with Pearlie, she had a son, Lawrence Desmond Dane, who was born in Muswellbrook on the 12th of November 1917. The father of this child was Francis Ellerslie Dane, who was a minor, and she is listed under Vilma Viola Ninness. This was only 5 months after their marriage, which occurred in Sydney on the 12th of June 1917. The marriage, the family says, lasted only 6 weeks after the birth of Lawrence. So Lawrence was also raised by Emily Ninness. So if the assumption is that Pearlie was brought up by Emily and Albert, well, then they also brought up Lawrence as well, their adopted grandson, I suppose you could say. And the family says that he was only young when he discovered the truth of who his mother really was, and he tried many times over many years to have a relationship with his birth mother, but they never seemed to have found their peace. He was also interested to know who his father was. His father that was on his birth certificate, Frank Dane, was long deceased. However, a cousin of Frank Dane was found, Aussie Cats. Lawrence was overjoyed and welcomed them, and they had a relationship for a few years before Aussie's passing. In 2018, Lawrence's daughter submitted a DNA sample hoping to trace more family, and this led to evidence suggesting that Frank Dane, in fact, was not Lawrence's biological father as originally thought. It was, in fact, Doyle Charles Sidney Mallet, who looked identical to Lawrence when viewing photos. There is a second child that has Frank Dane listed as the father, but as you would have noticed from family recollections, that Pearlie and Frank's marriage and relationship only lasted 6 weeks. So this child quite possibly does not have Frank as the father, but Pearlie would have had to have written Frank's name considering she was still married to him. So this child was Dorothy Marion Dane, who was born in Sydney in 1923. Her parents' names listed as Frances Dane and Pearlie Ninness. When she died in 1986, she listed Albert Edward and Alice as her parents. It seems that she was unaware of who her true parents were. It seems that she grew up with Alice and Albert. Frances Dane married for the second time in 1931, and then Pearlie married Brian George Faulkner in 1920. Pearl's name is recorded as Vilma Jacqueline Swenson. They had a daughter, Leone Merrill Jacqueline Faulkner, on the 24th of May 1921 in Sydney. At some point around 1939, Brian, Vilma and Leone all travelled to Canada, and in the Canadian Women's Army Corps, Leone Merrilee and Vilma Jacqueline enlisted. There was an article in a Canadian newspaper on the 2nd of February 1943 with mother and daughter listed as Privates Merrilee and R.G. Faulkner. For the first time in a good number of years, seeing the world together and going into uniform at the same time, Private B.G. Faulkner and her daughter, Private Merrilee Faulkner, were separated when the latter left for Ottawa, where she has been appointed Assistant Radio Liaison Officer for the Department of Information. The pair with Mr. Faulkner, who, as a veteran of the last war, came to this city from Australia about 1.5 years ago. Down under, Mrs. Faulkner and her daughter attended university together. They have been in the Canadian Women's Army Corps for the past 6 weeks, and is expected they'll be reunited shortly. Leone married in Washington, USA in 1948 when she was 26, but she died on the 3rd of February 1969 in San Francisco, aged only 47. And it was this time that Pearlie appears to be living with her, in my theory, adopted mother, Emily Ninness, under the name of Jacqueline in 1947 in Newcastle. On the 18th of January 1951 in the Sydney Sun, there was an article titled "Woman Lived Life of Lies for 19 Years." So you may have been getting a little confused with Pearlie as to why I was referring to her with slightly different names, so this will be able to answer your question. The strange case of a woman who lived a series of amazing lies for almost 20 years with a man who wrongly believed he was her legal husband was told in the divorce court today. The deceived man, Brian George Faulkner, 54, a building contractor of the Mayfair Hotel, petitioned for his marriage to Pearlie Gertrude Dane, falsely known as Faulkner, of Newcastle to be declared null and void. A wedding certificate produced in the court showed that Mrs. Dane married Francis Ellerslie Dane, or Katz, in Sydney in 1917, when she gave her maiden name as Ninness and birthplace as Muswellbrook. Another certificate showed that in 1920, when she went through a form of marriage with Faulkner, she gave her name as Velma Jacqueline Swenson, single, birthplace Darjeeling, India. In both certificates, her age was stated as 21. Faulkner told the court in support of his undefended petition that he knew his wife 6 months before their marriage. A year later, she introduced him to her mother, whom she called Nan, and described as her childhood nurse in India. She also introduced Thomas Ninness and 2 other people to him as the children of her nurse. Faulkner said he lived with his wife until 1939 when they went to Canada. Before we left, Thomas Ninness told me that he was my wife's brother and that Mrs. Ninness was her mother. When he asked his wife why she deceived him about her family for 19 years, she said she had been ashamed of them. As she had been reading books about India when she met him, she told him tales about life there and that her father was an army officer. He said she admitted that her real name had been Ninness and that she was born in Muswellbrook, not India. Faulkner said that in January 1950 he went to see his wife in Wallsend. Mr. Acting Justice Neild granted a decree of nullity returned in 3 months. In 1954, Jacqueline appears on the electoral roll as Jacqueline Neal. She is now living with Neville William Neal, and they spend the rest of their lives together, although no validation of marriage can be found. And family trees have Pearlie's death recorded at Sandgate, New South Wales on the 8th of February 1994 at the age of 95. Pearlie is buried under the name Jacqueline Neal at the Waverley Cemetery alongside Neville Faulkner's parents. In part 2, I'll cover the rest of Alice Maria Ninness's children, as well as an event that was quite shocking for Alice. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch.